good morning, everyone. It's a real honor to be here to talk about environmental justice and civil rights. So let me bring up my presentation. Do you see that? It's good. So Natalie asked me to talk about the roles and responsibilities of the public health professional for environmental justice, and I thought I'd just recast it a little bit because I really think that rather than just talk about roles and responsibilities, talk about the opportunities for the public health professional. And During what I think is a really unique and important time. So I call this a historic era of transformational change for environmental justice and civil rights. And so that's what I'm going to really talk to. And in terms of this, in terms of like the historical arc of environmental justice, over now the past 40, 50 years now. I mean, and for me, 40, 50 years now. Yeah, EPA's commitments or EPA's current commitments to advancing environmental justice and civil rights and the opportunities therefore therein for the public health professionals. So let me just start by talking about something we all know about, which is the legacy of environmental inequality. This is a map of Oakland, California, with the redlining maps from the 1930s overlaid against Cal Enviro and you can see the relationship, almost the correlation between the redlining maps and areas of environmental degradation. Um, and One of the things that this slide also provides is some of the verbatim descriptions of the surveyors of these areas, particularly the most hazardous D areas. You could both see the kind of, I guess, attitudes or perspectives and attitudes of these surveyors towards these areas, which are predominantly people of color and low income, and their intersection with environmental ills, industrial and otherwise. And so what we are now seeing is a body of literature that has grown up in recent years around the relationship between historical redlining and present day neighborhood environmental and health outcomes. This quote is pretty telling from this article that is a literature review of this current literature. The vast majority of studies found that evidence of an association between redlining and poor outcomes. Many studies reported an association on a gradient, such as each grade moving from A to D had a higher risk for adverse outcome, suggesting a dose response relationship between poorer grades and adverse impact. So so this is the legacy that we're all trying to deal with, and in fact the environmental justice movement, as it began in the early 1980s and to now, and current efforts that EPA and the federal government as a whole to try to address. So in 1982, many of you know, there was a protest in Warren County, North Carolina, where 500 people were arrested in opposition to the siting of a PCB landfill. And you could see this iconic picture of people laying down in front of the trucks carrying the PCB laden soil. This has been seen as the event that kind of projected environmental justice into being a national issue. I was there to show solidarity and was fortunate to go from there to work for the Civil Rights Agency of the United Church of Christ, where we laid a lot of the groundwork for making environmental justice a national issue. That uh, one of those things that did that, and like I like to say, put the issue on the map, uh, was my report, Toxic Waste and Race, in the United States, which was published in 1987. This is a picture of us announcing the report at the National Press Club um, um, in 1987, and I guess there are many things which are memorable about this picture, but for me, the most memorable thing is the fact that my hair was so black. Toxic Waste and Race was most important finding was that race was the most significant among variables tested in association with the location of hazardous waste facilities. It is the factor that's most predictive of the location of hazardous waste sites. And when we sent the report to EPA, the response that we got back from J. Winston Porter, who was the former or the then assistant administrator of solid waste and emergency response, and his letter said that EPA deals with issues of technology and not sociology. That statement, I think, really is emblematic of the way that environmental protection in this country has evolved with a blind spot to issues of race and to the distributional consequences of environmental burden. The toxic waste and race kind of started to put on the table a number of policy recommendations, such as an executive order on environmental on the issue, a formation of an office at EPA, a national advisory committee, actions on the part of state government, local government, and things which will help empower communities and build capacity in communities. The other one of the important things that grew out of toxic waste and race was interest in the academic community on the issue. And the first major event was being the first national academic conference at the University of Michigan on race and the incidence of environmental hazards that was organized by Professors Bunyan Bryant and Paul Mohai. I make the point here that if you think about the state of academic research around environmental justice then and now, there is a world of difference. Today, there's a extensive scholarship in multiple areas related to environment and social justice. There's at least thousands of peer-reviewed journal articles, whereas in the early 1980s, there was but a handful. There's hundreds of courses in universities on environmental justice, even a PhD program at the University of Michigan. And I would say that this body of research and scholarship is not just extensive, but it's actually growing in leaps and bounds. And it is one of the really hopeful things hopeful and important things that marks this era of transformative change for environmental justice and civil rights. Uh, Also, the First National People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit grew out of our understanding in the 1980s that there were emerging but significant activity on the part of people of color communities to address issues of the environment that counter to what the general kind of thinking was, well, being that people of color didn't care about environment was patently untrue. And so thought that a really important way to bring all this energy together and to coalesce a national movement around environmental justice was to hold an event like the first National People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit. This is where the 17 principles of environmental justice, which stands till today, was codified, and these speak to issues such as the sacredness of Mother Earth and having public policy that's based on mutual respect and justice, sustainability, self-determination, and the right to participate in the decision-making process as equal partners. On the governmental front, in 1990, after the establishment of the Office of Environmental Equity at EPA, President Clinton signed a, a an executive order on environmental justice, Executive Order 12898 in 1994, and which called upon every federal agency to develop agency-wide environmental justice strategies to identify and address disproportionate high and adverse human health and environmental effects of its programs, policies, and activities on minority populations and low-income populations. This was the first now of many executive orders that speak to this issue, and two of which are the ones that President Biden signed in the very beginnings of his administration, which are the executive order on tackling the climate crisis at home and abroad, which is Executive Order 14008. There are many things that calls for, but one of the most prominent of which is the Justice 40 initiative that will to deliver 40% of the benefits of a set of federal programs around energy, climate, housing, clean water, and others to disadvantaged communities. Executive Order 13985 is a very important one on racial equity, advancing racial equity and support for underserved communities. These call for so here it goes. Executive Order 13985 has a comprehensive approach towards equity. It has a very expansive definition, as you can see here, in terms of what equity entails, being the consistent and systematic, fair, just, and impartial treatment of all individuals. And this includes a large number of groups which go on the traditional bounds of what we think of in terms of just people of color and indigenous and populations. And it also calls for every federal agency to conduct a equity assessment, looking to what are the obstacles to achieving equity. This for EPA, this resulted in an equity action plan that has 6 priority actions. One is developing and implementing a cumulative impacts framework to providing support for building capacity in community EJ communities, strengthening EPA's capacity to engage communities to strengthen EPA's external civil rights program to integrate community science in research and program implementation, and making EPA's procurement and contracting more equitable. Administrator Reagan uh, uh, began commitment towards environmental justice with a significant, important memo in early 2021, and this is part of his direction that EPA needs to make sure that environmental justice is at the very center of everything that EPA does, and part of the DNA of EPA. And this includes, of course, strengthening enforcement and of both environmental and civil rights laws, incorporating EJ considerations in our work, engagement, much more meaningful engagement with communities, and I can't see the rest of this, um, but I think you can see the rest. So part of that is in terms of making environmental justice and civil rights part of the center of what we do is reflected in this graphic here, which talks about EPA's strategic plan. And many do not realize for many, the idea of strategic plans may seem bureaucratic and out of touch, but in fact, it is one of the most important ways that government agencies have to impact policy, practice, and change. And so, if you let me walk you through this. Heretofore, EPA carries out its mission to protect human health and the environment with three principles, which is to follow the science, follow the law, and be transparent. Through this process, EPA added a fourth principle, which is to advance justice and equity. So this is a really, I think, historic development, and and over time we will see how important it is, because in many ways, the way that environmental protection has been carried out has been kind of blind to these issues of equity and justice, and so and in addition to this, EPA made advancing environmental justice and civil rights one of the 7 major goals, and just at the same par with enforcement or achieving clean water and clean air. And so this is really elevating the idea of environmental justice and civil rights as an integral set of actions, integrated set of actions. That's at the very heart of how EPA should be doing business. So the goal 2 includes 3 major items, which is promoting EJ and civil rights in government, at the federal, state, and local levels, in our own programs, policies, and activities, and strengthening, making using the full authorities of the Civil Rights Acts in communities with EJ concern. One of the more interesting measures that's being developed as part of the strategic planning process is a set of metrics around EPA's role or EPA's performance in reducing health disparities or environmental health disparities. So none of this means very much unless this gets reflected on the ground as far as impacting communities. And just this one example, I think, is very instructive. There was in Chicago, there was the relocation of a scrap metal facility called General Iron from a predominantly white and affluent west side of Chicago to the predominantly poor Hispanic and Black southeast side. And Administrator Regan met with Mayor Lightfoot and urged Chicago to take the issues of environmental justice seriously as they are doing their permit review. And as part of that letter says that, this is an area that scored has many indicators of environmental injustice, and in fact epitomizes the problem, and that we urge the city of Chicago to do an environmental justice analysis using perhaps a health impact assessment approach to consider these impacts. And Chicago not only agreed, but they completed a really extensive and I think really groundbreaking report. And in fact, perhaps one of the first time, probably the first time, that health impact assessment has been used in a regulatory permitting context. The result of all this was a denial by the Chicago Department of Public Health of the facilities permit. It also made recommendations around actions to look at the upstream factors related to land use planning and zoning, and recognizing how those issues are the very are the drivers for the concentration of environmental burden in certain areas of the city. It also called for the continuation of efforts to secure a cumulative impact ordinance in Chicago. In September of 2022, EPA made a historic leap in the way it organizes ourselves when Administrator Regan announced the formation of a new program office, or a new national program on environmental justice and external civil rights. He chose to make this announcement in recognition of the fact that all these developments are built upon the shoulders of the work of many people, and so in recognition of that, he chose the birthplace of environmental justice at Warren County to make his announcement. The Office of Environmental Justice and External Civil Rights combines the Office of Environmental Justice and the External Civil Rights Compliance Office and the Conflict Prevention and Resolution Center into this one large program office. It is at the same level now of the other major media offices, like the Office of Air, Office of Water, Office of Research, or Office of Enforcement, and it is going to be led by a Senate confirmed assistant administrator, and certainly this is building out a whole host of new possibilities for doing work at a higher level, at a level never seen before for environmental justice, and an affirmation of the importance of civil rights, which is also I think a really important new direction for EPA. The other part of what makes this period a really transformative time for environmental justice and civil rights is the amount of resources that are now being made available, and we're talking about close to $50 million from the American Rescue Plan to several $100 million to in the bipartisan infrastructure law, and then more than $2 billion in the Inflation Reduction Act, and so that caused us to think through, what would be a good ecosystem or a good way to start to think to provide these resources in a way that conforms to the needs of environmental justice communities, but also with the eye towards really making change in a way that's needed, has never been done before, and is certainly needed. And so we came up with a framework that includes having the ability to do assessment and provide technical assistance, to do planning and project planning, project development, to continue what we had in terms of prior grants, in terms of what are now build pilots and the partnership type grants, and then large scale, and we're talking about grants in perhaps the tens of millions of dollars to do real change. And so as this unfolds, we can see now that these technical assistance, building a foundation for technical assistance, is where we started with these thriving community technical assistance centers. This was actually announced by Administrator Regan yesterday, over something to the tune of $177 million over 5 years to 17 centers across the country with 160 partner organizations. And what you see here is the announcement in New York City that with the Minister Regan and WEAC, which is one of the partner organizations for one of the technical assistance centers. Several other competitions of note, and these are the EJ Collaborative Problem Solving Grants at some $30 million, EJ Government to Government grants, and these are largely going to be done with communities at $1 million each, and the other grants team areas are things that are still in the process of being developed. A few words on civil rights, and there's a number of statutes that are involved in our civil rights mission, but certainly the one that's most important is Title VI, which means that no recipient of federal financial assistance should partake in activities that result in a discriminatory impact. And there's been an upsurge in complaints around Title VI, and communities are learning how to use Title VI in ways that's never been done before, and so that's really, really exciting. I want to underscore the fact that what the civil rights laws, and this is taken decades for EPA to understand, is that civil rights laws create independent obligations that recipients compliance with federal environmental laws is not necessarily mean that they're complying with their civil rights obligations, and that they have an independent obligation to comply or to proactively put into place processes to comply with their civil rights obligations, and that and that the enforcement of civil rights laws, on the one hand, and the full use of our authorities under environmental law should complement each other. And that, done properly, these would really help ensure um, uh, the fullest protection for communities which are overburdened. So I guess all that is to paint a picture to what this means for the public health professional. And I thought I would just sum up by saying, that like I said at the beginning, the theme of this talk is the opportunities for the public health professional during this current historic era of transformative change for environmental justice and civil rights. And I thought it will come down to four things, which is to really partake in solutions that are based upon systems thinking. Secondly, to build authentic participatory relationships in your work, to think about transformative change in terms of equity, justice, diversity, inclusion, and civil rights, and then just thinking boldly and innovatively about research on the possibilities for that. And so first, systems thinking quickly is to be, holistic and work in a multidisciplinary, intersectional manner. The graphic here is from Dr. Jacoby Wilson, who is a University of Michigan, Maryland, and a great friend to APHA. And I think, I'm not going to go through this in detail, but you can see what Jacoby is really trying to do is to show, all the factors that are involved in their interplay, from structural factors to very specific types of policies and actions, and how they create both a positive, salutogenic kind of impacts as well as negative or pathogenic impacts. Secondly, participatory science, and we're all trying to move forward, I think, in this, and it underscores, I want to underscore the value of this in terms of filling data gaps and improving the public's understanding of issues and their buy-in into actions to be taken, resulting in better public policy, creating a stronger, inclusive, more collaborative network. It really is talking about building the basis for new ways of doing science. For example, EPA has a new effort, has an effort to create a community participatory science research center. And that's going to be in Edison, New Jersey. And then lastly, of course, we're going to learn that this is going to yield cost savings and efficiencies. Institutional transformation, we can go all day into this, but I just think that it's time to really to bring to bear the possibilities of like going beyond just thinking about equity to equality, to think about what it means to truly achieve equity, to achieve justice, where we're removing the barriers removing barriers to agency, where we're empowering communities to really find solutions for themselves. And lastly, like I said before, there is this incredible opportunity for bold, innovative research. These are just some of the new areas that EPA has identified in terms of cross-cutting research priorities. But I think we're finding, and certainly with all the new resources that's going to be made available, the possibilities for that kind of research to take us to an entirely new generation for environmental justice and environmental justice results is possible. So I think, Natalie, I just stop there, and I hope I've been able to give people a picture of like how we got here and the possibilities of where we can go and why the current period is so important, and we need to take advantage of it.